for the introduction, what is the political science? We can say that the political science is the study of power, government, and country management. This can help us understand how leaders make decisions and how laws are created. So, what the political science involves in solving global human rights issues. So we can say that this is study power system and international relation. So that help create better policy to protect vulnerable group.
So first, I'm going to be explaining a role of political science in addressing human rights. Political science studies are needed to have a better understanding of human rights issues. First is through educating leaders and citizens about human rights and democratic participation. This will help increase their knowledge and combat issues within the society. Next is ensure separation of power. This is to check abuse and allow a clearer image to address human rights violation, thus enhancing the rights of people. Lastly, political science uses analysis and theory to highlight and solve privacy, freedom, and justice issues in the society. This is because through political science, we can further deepen one's understanding on human rights.
Thank you, my dearest friend. Now, it is my turn to share with you guys our case studies on human rights challenges. For the first one, we have refugee crisis, and the second one, we have political oppression. Last but not least, we have restrictions on free speech. Let's dive deeper into it. The first case studies that we'll be talking about is refugee crisis. Refugee crisis happens when people run from their home country to another to escape or free themselves from war, armed conflict, or even persecution. For example, Myanmar. Myanmar has been in civil war since 2021. This caused its people, the Rohingyas, to flee to neighboring countries such as Malaysia and also Bangladesh. Not to mention, this has caused an incredibly increased number of refugees in Malaysia. However, the government in Malaysia does not acknowledge their status as a refugee. Therefore, this causes them difficulties in living their daily life. Not to mention, by not acknowledging their status as a refugee, it has limited their access to education, as well as making it harder for them to receive healthcare treatment in Malaysia. But thankfully, Malaysia has signed a memorandum of understanding with the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees to give a discount in healthcare prices for these refugees for them to receive treatment. However, it is still at an incredibly high price. Not to mention, these refugees has also been receiving education from the community school. The teachers there are basically refugees themselves or even volunteers. With the collaboration of private universities, local NGOs, and private donors, they have been trying very hard to give a proper education to the children of refugees. For the second case studies, we will be talking about political oppression. Political oppression happens when authorities unfairly restrict and punish the people for their political beliefs, opinions, and actions. For example, what happened in South Korea, specifically Gwangju, back in 1980s. They started a pro-democracy protest movement called Gwangju Uprising. It was a call for democracy after years of authoritarian-style governance. As a result, students were heavily beaten up by the military regime, and not to mention, the military had also burned an unknown number of cops. They also had suppressed the media and manipulated it. This caused the people to go outside and find any flyers that were being distributed physically to know the current update of the situation in the country. However, in 1990s, the former president Chun Do-hwan was convicted for the crimes he committed. The end of the military dictatorship had also showed how far the authoritarian-style governance could go to keep the public in control. Therefore, the Gwangju Uprising is now recognized as a symbol of civil resistance. Last but not least, we'll be discussing about restrictions on free speech. Free speech gives the definition of freedom to express oneself, but the government, they tend to heavily control or even criminalize it. For example, in People's Republic of China, it is happening in current time. The country is restricting free speech to control the public. The media is excessively being controlled while filtering anything that spreads anti-governmental hate. For example, the pro-democracy movement in Beijing's Tiananmen Square that led to martial law and thousands were killed. It had received a brutal response from the police, from the country, from the government. As a result, any keywords or any discussions, any related terms to the incident are deleted or even filtered by the government through the Great Firewall of China. This shows how free speech is heavily restricted in the country.
Moving on to democracy and its influence on human rights. Human rights and democracy come together due to the fact that the main idea and concept of democracy is based on human rights. First is rule of the law, which means that every individual is held accountable for their actions no matter how much power they hold. Next is election, fair and free participation of citizens in the politics. Citizens are allowed to express their opinion and be involved in the government's decision-making processes, as well as influence the policy-making processes. Third is independent court, where they help combat issues such as abuse of power among the chosen representative leaders. Lastly is responsiveness, where political leaders cater the needs of the citizens. Political leaders' main goal is to ensure that citizens have an adequate standard of living. This is why they prioritize policies under education, healthcare, and welfare of the people.
Next, I'm going to talk about the challenges and its limitation to address the human rights issues. The first challenges is political will. Lack of political will often blame it for the policy failure and usually affects deeper problems like weak institution, lack of consensus, and misaligned incentives. When lack of political will happen, it will make it harder to ensure that human rights are upheld, as the leader may avoid reforms, protect their own interests, and resist international pressure. For example, refugees in Malaysia. Agencies like United Nations High Commissioner for Refugee (UNHCR) try to help and push for national policy to protect refugees. But, however, without political will, all this effort will not work. Malaysia did sign the agreement with the UNHCR, but the refugees like Rohingya still lack of access to healthcare and education because the government does not give them the legal recognition. This shows that the government benefits more by keeping the status quo so that they don't have to spend money and then they avoid public backlash. The second challenge is cultural and national sovereignty. While human rights are declared universal, like Universal Declaration of Human Rights (UDHR), and Association of Southeast Asian Nations which is Asian, there are countries that often limit certain rights in the name of national identity, culture, or religion. By using culture to justify right violation, it reveals double standard and weakens international efforts to protect human rights equally. This will create tension between respecting cultural values and upholding universal standards. So, for more simpler explanation, say that even though the UDHR and Asian has made a declaration that says human rights are for everyone, but some countries does not follow this fully. For example, in Indonesia, the government support human rights, but only if they don't go against local, cultural, or religious values, which this often limit things like freedom of expression.
So for the conclusion, we can say that political science is essential for understanding and addressing global human rights challenges. This because political science help us understand how government work, how power is used, and how law are made and implementing. By studying political system, we can identify where human rights are being protected. Without political science, we will struggle to find effectiveness solution to problems like oppression, discrimination, and lack of freedom in many parts of the world. And the second point is help explain power dynamic, promote accountability, and protect individual freedom. This is because political science helps us understand how power is distributed and used in government or political system. At the same time, it works to protect individual freedom, such as freedom of speech, the right protest, and fair treatment under the law.